My name is Alan Patterson, and I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps. I entered the service in 1969 because I was drafted into the Army, and my dad always said if he had a chance to be in the service again, he was in the Army. He said he would have went into the Marines, and so I joined the Marine Corps one day before I was drafted. My MOS was just a grunt. Once I got to Vietnam, there was me and a 6-foot guy, and they one's going to go into a squad, rifle squad, or mortars. And so they put me in mortars because they need somebody to carry mortar rounds. And instead of picking the big guy, they picked me. One time we were chasing Charlie through the bush, and they went underground, and they needed somebody to go into this hole and tunnel and check it out. And I met a guy that had a wonderful family and stuff. He's telling me about it, and he was the main guy. And I remember looking at him, and I kept thinking, let me go in there. I felt kind of invincible, so he handed me his .45 and the flashlight, and told me, don't turn it on too much, and watch out for snakes going in. And I went in there, and from then on, I was the company tunnel rat. And so whenever they found a tunnel, I would go in and check it out, and I don't know, I just felt, I'm not going to say invincible, I was never afraid. It just didn't bother me to do that. I never thought much about it until I joined this Marine Honor Detail, and when I told some of the stories, I didn't realize, I'll be honest with you, that it was that big of a deal.
My name is Lori Riggs, and I was an E4, and I was in the Army. I entered in 1979 for 4 years, got out in 1982, and the reason was so that I could get a career training in the medical field. My job in the military was an orthopedic technician, and what we did was applied cast and traction and assisted in surgery, splints, has everything to do with the muscular skeletal system, broken bones, that kind of thing.
My name is Adam Riggs. I was a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. My job in the Marine Corps was an 0621. It was recently, I was a radio operator, but the name of it recently changed to transmission systems operator. So basically, this is the way that it was explained to me when I graduated boot camp from my drill instructor. He said, "Oh, you're an 0621?" I was like, yes, and yes, sir. And he said, "Oh, well, those old Vietnam and war movies where the guy has the backpack with the antenna sticking out of it?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, you know how he gets shot first?" And I said, "Yeah, I know that." And he's like, "Yeah, that's you." And so my smile was like, "Oh, like that," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And so that was my job. Basically, was just to to ensure communications between my command and adjoining and adjacent commands as well, and entities. It was really cool. I started off using like really primitive radio types, and then by the end of it, by this last year, all of a sudden we were using like these high-tech computer basic, they were basically computers, but they were radios. And my job evolved from just being a person that set it up and using it to being a supervisor of people who did it. And then I went into planning, how to plan to get the best communication assets. And then I ended up working in a vault, basically in charge of all of those radios because they're classified, and the encryption that goes in them is secret. And so that ended up being my job at the end of it, was safeguarding and ensuring the control of those items. So basically I was just locked in a bank vault all day, every day, and just took care of inanimate objects.
I started basic training in Alabama at Fort McClellan. Then I went to basic medical training, Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. and then orthopedic training in Presidio, San Francisco. Then for my permanent party duty, I went back to Fort McClellan to Letterman Army Hospital. And from there, I did my overseas tour in Germany at the 97th General Hospital in Frankfurt. It was hard because it was the very first time that I'd ever left home. I was only 17 when I went in, just a month away from my 18th birthday. And that part was hard. The PT was hard, sit-ups and running and all that kind of stuff. But luckily, my recruiter had taken me out for the last 3 months before I went in and had me practice running. So I was up to 3 miles when I went in, so that helped a great deal. That was about the hardest part. I loved it. I had a blast, except for basic, which wasn't a blast. But after basic training, it was just like a regular job. And the best part, I got to meet lots of new people from all over the U.S. and make a lot of new friends that I had never had the opportunity to make friends before growing up, because you would think I was a military brat, but I wasn't. My parents just liked to move a lot, and I went to 15 different schools in 13 years, and I never had the chance to stick around and make friends. But in the military, I made a lot of friends, even though we moved around a lot. It was deep friendships.
So I went to boot camp in MCRD San Diego, so just down the street. From there, I went to Marine Combat Training in Camp Pendleton. That's in the very north part by San Clemente. From there, I went to school in 29 Palms, and that was not fun because I went there during summer, so that was cool, I guess. So we went there, and then from there, I went to Hawaii. And I was stationed there for a while, and then from there we did some other things, came back to California a lot, and did some deployments from there. I have been on, I believe, I've been on 3 deployments. I was going to say 4 for a second, but I've been on 3 deployments. My first 2 deployments were to basically, like, our base area was Okinawa, Japan. And so, like, we would go there, and then that's where we would do all of our stuff. And the first time, at both times I was deployed there, we got activated for North Korea. They were doing some weird stuff up there. And one of the times, I believe it was the first time that we actually went to South Korea and as a show of force, but nothing ended up happening from that. Although, come to find out from our division sergeant major who came to talk to us, the closeness that we got to, like, actually kicking that one off was it was hair thin. It was pretty amazing how close we almost went to war with that during that time. And the second time, not so much, but we did get activated for it. We just didn't end up going that time. We got called off a lot sooner. The third deployment that I went on was to the Special Purpose MAGTF over in the Middle East. So basically, our job as the ground combat element of the GCE was to keep peace in the neighboring countries, and we were basically like the 911 force for all of the embassies. It was stood up after the whole Benghazi incident, right? So if you know anything about that. Where basically one of our embassies got overrun and Marines and the ambassador was murdered. So that's when this got stood up, and so that was our job. It was that, and then also to quarrel any other kind of major incidents that would happen. So during that deployment, I was in Kuwait, I was in Saudi Arabia, I was in Jordan, and then a couple other places, Bahrain. I mean, I had a chance to fly all around, yeah, so that's where I went. The most difficult thing about going on deployment, it's funny, when I was young, during my first 2, I wasn't married. And so the most difficult part was like leaving my Beamer back at base, right? Or like trying to like ensure that everything was going to be okay with my car, and the insurance was paid, and making sure that the stupid rats wouldn't get up into the car and eat all the wiring. And that was that was the hardest thing about going on deployment. Or like, can I get my Xbox over there? Stuff like that, right? This last deployment was a lot more difficult. This last one, I had a wife. I had 3 kids, excuse me. I had 3 kids already. And my focus went from where it used to be about like, how is this gonna really be difficult for me, to now I was really feeling like, how is this gonna be difficult for my family? I noticed how my shift of focus wasn't on me anymore. Especially on this last deployment, about like the feelings I had about it was that I wasn't going to come home. I was fully convinced that I was not going to see my family again, that was going to be it. So as I left, it was incredibly difficult because, I was looking at my daughters and thinking like, I'll never know who is going to marry these guys, what guys are going to marry them. And I didn't know who was going to walk them down the aisle. And I didn't know who was going to teach my son how to be a man, or who's going to help my wife with all that. So it became that was the difficult thing. And I would say that, that is leaving my family behind to go, literally across the entire planet, and just letting them kind of fight the battle here while I was gone. No matter what happened to me, that was definitely difficult.
I think going into the villages and you seeing the people that were really, they were poor, and they were making do with their rice and didn't get a lot of meat and things like this. And I felt sorry for the people at times, but I tried to make friends with their children and the kids, and I did to an extent make friends. There was this one kid that we're not supposed to have kids come into our camp, and this one lieutenant was pretty strong about that. But this one kid, he used to wear this funny-looking hat, and he'd come up there and he had a little bag of rice that he wanted to give me as a gift. But of course, he wanted a little exchange, and so he made me some rice, and of course, do you have a can of meat? And we put that in there, and I remember he cooked it, then he gave it to me. Let me eat it first, and I ate a little bit, but then he finished the rest of it, and then about a week later, we used to play cards, like this, at times when they were allowed to come into the camp, and about 2 days later, he got caught in a ambush because he was shooting at us. And I remember they brought him into camp, and I remember looking at that kid, and I'm thinking, wow, that's my buddy. So, didn't expect that. What kind of condition was he in to have to shoot at a friend? Young kids, they're not in that situation. They don't understand that. So, I think the scenery. I remember flying over in the helicopter one time, and I remember looking down at the rice paddies, and there was bomb craters everywhere. I mean, everywhere. And I feel sorry for the farmers, that are raising crops because around impacting the ground compacts the ground, so I feel like this. But there was lots of times in Vietnam it was pretty. I remember the sunsets, and I remember it getting dark at night. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I remember things like that. It was an experience. The fireflies would come out at night, and they put on a show, So, and the mosquitoes. There was a million mosquitoes. I got malaria from the mosquitoes.
The best thing about being on deployment is the simplicity of it, honestly. A lot of people think that deploying, like, let's say you're single, it's a lot easier. But if you're deployed, a lot of people think that that's like super scary and that like it's super stressful. And yeah, it has its stressful and its scary moments. But it's also really, really simple in multiple ways, right? So one, I didn't have to pay my bills anymore. Like, my wife took care of that because I couldn't get on the internet to do it, right? I don't have to worry about being summoned for jury duty. I don't have to worry about whatever. Everything gets put on hold, everything. And so you're able to just, for us, it's just like I get to be with the boys for 7 months, but I think that's something. But there's something about the military in general that gets heightened when you're on deployment. When you're in the military, right, no matter what service is, I think it's definitely something different with the Marine Corps because we go through harder and just harder situations, especially just quality of life. And there's something about those tough situations that builds a bond between between people. And so you're able to like those bonds when you're on deployment are stronger than anything ever before, right? It's you really become family because that person is all you have right now. You might have family back home, but they're back home. And so if you need someone right now, like that person, your brother, your friend, that is your family in that moment. And so you can definitely become closer. And that's where you get the whole thing of like, that's where like, as Marines, even if you're not a Christian or whatever, but we all know the verse that, no greater love than to lay down your life for a brother. And that's where that comes in key. And I would say another way of how it becomes super easy is just it's survival, right? So it's like, it's just survival. You know what I mean? You don't have to worry about people lying, doing all these things. Lying, yeah, but you don't have to worry about like half the things that you have to worry about here in the United States that could just like take you out at any moment or whatever. It's just over there. It's like you basically know what's happening and you know where the dangers are and you kind of avoid that and you're okay unless some freak thing happens, but it's crazy simpler.
Oh, I had fun playing cards with the other guys, and since I was a kid, I already knew how to cook. I knew how to camp, so I was already ahead of a lot of guys, and so there was lots of times that you show somebody how to set up a better hooch, or we played cards, and like I say, and once in a while we got to come into the rear, and we played volleyball and play games, and you could totally relax, because you were protected by other Marines, because you're in the rear. So those are some of the good things.
Serving in the military was difficult for me on a couple different levels. One was like I was always far away from home. That's good and bad. I'm glad God took me away from home because I was able to see more of this country and more of this world, right? And and I was able to experience so much. I mean, really, like I lived in Hawaii for 4 years. Granted, I was almost never there, but I can say that. And but I wasn't really home. Like there was a lot of stuff that I missed. But I think one of the most difficult things in the military is that like your time is not yours, and neither is your body. Neither is your, anything about your life. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the government, to the military, to those that are set in charge of you. So, working 7 days a week and working like 12 to 13 hours a day was a very normal thing in the Marine Corps. And when you're on deployment, you aren't off ever, you know what I mean? So it was like 7 months of just on, which was very tiring. But now that I'm out, like now all of a sudden I've got like all these weird medical things, and it's like I don't know what's going on. But I would say that the mental toll that it takes on you, the things that you see in what they take from you, is really difficult. Serving in the Marine Corps was also a lot of fun. Like just yesterday, we were coming up to 215 and we were passing March Air Force Base, and we seen a C-17 coming in for a landing. C-17 is the really big Air Force planes, right? Like the really big ones. And it was coming in for a landing, and we were like, that's super cool, and obviously everyone else on the 215 is staring at the plane instead of the freeway, but I get it, And I was talking to Chandel, my wife, and I was like, isn't it funny how, like, when I was in the Marine Corps, that was normal place right there. Like, we would see an Apache helicopter fly over the house at, like, 50 feet above the ground, you know what I mean? Just like, or it was so commonplace to see tanks just rolling down the street next to us, or to see helicopters coming in and shooting at targets, or planes coming in shooting at targets and then dipping out, and on deployment it was just like you were hearing the jets taking off and the jets coming back, and sometimes you could hear them firing, and then we would have like the missile inbound sirens and no one would care and stuff like that. But I mean, it was just like the overall of it, right? Like the things I got to experience and do and see was, I mean, just amazing. Like no one can ever take that away from me. And I think that that's one of the coolest things. Like for 4 years, I worked with artillery. I felt the blast of a basically like this miniature 155 millimeter round bomb going off in a tube in front of me, right? And just like poof, and I got to pull the lanyard. I got to send it down range, and I got to load it, and I got to move with it, and I got to drive Humvees. I got to get inside of a tank. To go inside of a tank, I got to ride in a C-130, and I got to do all these things, to go all these countries and all these things, all this experience that I've gained and I've done. I mean, I'll never be able to tell my grandkids or my kids everything, right? But I've got all these stories to tell that just so many people that don't go will never have. I mean, it's just amazing.
I think that I was 18 years old when I went into the service, and at the time I didn't pay a lot of attention to the politics, or we had the 60s revolution, the long hair and the hippies and all that kind of stuff, but I was trying to be a jock, and I was more interested in my job. But when we called, when I got to Vietnam, we called America the world. What's going on in the world? And once in a while you'd run into some guy that you're doing guard duty at night, and this guy just came back from a place called Woodstock. I'd never heard of it. And he was telling me that don't wear your uniform home. And I'm like, What do you mean? Because I'm thinking like World War II, parades, all that kind of stuff. He says, no, man, it's not that way. He says, you can be attacked. And he told me some stories about some people slamming baby diapers on their uniform to cover up their medals for killing babies and all that kind of stuff. And I was really dumbfounded. But when I came home, I wore my uniform. And I just wore it the one day, you know. So I was prepared. But I didn't see nothing. I just jumped on a plane in California, went to Arizona, and I didn't run across anybody that I thought that I should be aware of. And I wasn't looking for any trouble, but I was ready for it. And then the next day it came off, and I'm back into civilian clothes. I never put back a uniform back on until I joined this Marine Honor detail at the Riverside National Cemetery.
I used to think, and even as a junior Marine, I used to think that the generals and the high leadership in our government, right, really high leadership, I used to think that they were these masterminds, that they were super smart. They were obviously college educated. They've been to war college, all that good stuff. And then and then about 4 years ago was then when I was like thinking about the officer rank, and I was like thinking, oh, I can go to college for literally anything and be an officer. So that's obviously, they're not smarter than me. So there's that. And then on deployment was when it really changed my mind about leadership in the military, which is why I got out. I think that huge mistakes were made that were obvious to see that they were mistakes when they were made, but they were still made, and people died because of that. People that I knew died because of that. And I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. And that's not to say that those people are going to be in their positions forever, because they're definitely not. But as a society, and as America as a whole, multiple things. First of all, as a society, I think that our people that are in this country don't get out often enough. You know what I mean? Like, you try to tell people that aren't cultured to get out of the house once in a while, and that's true. We should experience other cultures. But I think that there's some people in our country that don't get out enough. Let me put it to you this way. On my deployment, I'm not going to go into details. Bad things happened. But people were willing to do stuff that meant certain death. There was no way it was going to work out the way that they hoped that it would. There's absolutely no way. They were willing to do that for a chance to get into our country, or at least to get into an area that we controlled instead of the Taliban. People held on to airplanes to try to come to the United States. And we have people home, literally at that time. 13 Americans died on my deployment. 10 of them were from my unit. And in Riverside, downtown, they put up 13 flags, and we were still on deployment. We were still there. They put up 13 big American flags over the 91 freeway, and someone came around twice to tear down their flags. Twice. Those flags didn't stand for anything else but the people that died, that had every intention to come home, that were over in another country saving people's lives, saving their lives. But people think that America is so bad that they're willing to tear down the flags of service members who their bodies weren't even home yet. America is a really good place to live. It is the last place with as much freedom as we have. And we're like freely giving it up and wanting to be like these other countries that we have rescued people from. So as a country as a whole, I would say that, gosh darn it, we're the best country in the world. No, but I would say that we are an amazing country that has absolutely crazy freedoms. As a society, I would say that we can do a lot better to meet the responsibility of what those freedoms mean. There's a responsibility to having those freedoms that we have. There's a responsibility to the people that have died in order for us to have those freedoms. And even though you may say, oh, they didn't die for me to have those freedoms, they were in a different country, there are refugees here today, now, in this country, that those Marines saved. That they saved. Otherwise, they would have been killed. So, no, they did die for freedom. And they have been doing that for the last 20-something years. So I think as a society, we need to get out of the house more and really realize how amazing we have it and how precious it is and just how delicate it is and how easy it is for us to lose it. God definitely played a role in my military service. If you were to ask my mom, she would laugh, because we obviously prayed before I joined that it would be okay, that, if this is your will. And I'll be honest, for the first 4 years, I didn't know if it was, because I told you I was in the DEP program for almost an entire year, right? And I mean, I had to go through some hoops. I had to turn in every single doctor's note that I have ever gotten had to be turned in to the Marine Corps, so that way I could get a waiver to join because of a doctor said I had something I didn't have. I forget what that's called, but anyways, so I fought for it to get in, and so for like 4 years I was like, oh my God, I fought God for this. Like, oh, I made my bed, I gotta lay in it now. You know what I mean? And so I still don't know. I mean, God still allowed me to join, right? So, and I have everything I have right now because of it. So, I mean, I would definitely say that God played a role in at least me joining. And then later on, like, throughout my entire time in the Marine Corps, God was always there every single step, right? When I checked in my first unit, me and one other Marine at that time, we met up at LAX. The guy ended up his name is Danny Battles, one of my best friends in the entire world, and that's him. He's a cop in Illinois now. My kids call him Uncle. My wife knows him, and he was my roommate for 4 years. While I was in the Marine Corps for that first 4 years, hands down the most important person in my life was him. and person, that is. And so I met him there, and after we met, all of a sudden we meet this lady, because me and her were trying to go for the same charging port, right? Because I was trying to charge my computer, and she was trying to charge her phone. And I was like, I guess, like, whatever, go ahead, you can have it. I wasn't happy about it, but, whatever. Well, she ended up inviting me and Danny to church, at her church there in Oahu. And her name was Yvette. And so she ended up being one of our very best friends. And we went to that church for the next 4 years. She is now married to one of our friends that we made and that we took to church while we were there. His name is Luis. A salad bar. His name is Salazar, but we call him Salad Bar. But, and so now they're married. And so now we've got like this big old tangled web, and it all revolves around how God used each and every one of us to get to where we were, and now we're this big web. I also went through times of the depression while I was in the Marine Corps, and God showed me through all that, and when I was deployed, before I deployed and everything, I told you guys, I honestly did not think I was going to come home. The only thing I could do was put my faith in God. Even though I really didn't think I was going to come back, the only thing I could think of was, if this is God's will, then he's going to see something in the end. He knows what's going to happen. I was obviously worried about our kids and my wife and all of that and the church. But at the end of the day, I knew that if God was going to take me home, then he's already got something planned for everything that I'm going to leave back. And so that was when I really had nothing else I could do, because it's not like I couldn't just not show up to deployment, right? Like, you don't do that. So I had to go. My butt was getting on that bus. And so basically the only thing I had was to put my faith and trust in God, that no matter what happened to me, everything was going to be okay back home.
I believe God has played a role in every aspect of my life, but at the time, I didn't recognize him playing a role just because I was a Christian, but I wasn't necessarily participating. I was kind of on the outside looking in at that time, but he definitely had a role in me going in, the field that I went into, the people that I met, and the places that I served has all played a long-term effect on my life.
I think that that one time, that you've heard of Foxhole Confessions, and I never give God much thought. I mean, he was always in my mind, but never prayed for him every day and this and that. And if I did, they were just prayers to be saying them, And I remember one time there was a situation where we were getting shot at and stuff, and I was like, Lord, get me out of this mess, and when I get home, I'll do what's right. I made it as broad as possible. And a couple of years after coming home, I kept passing this little church in Chicago, and I remember I got to go in there. And I went in there, and first Sunday, I remember getting saved, and I got on the road. I heard the word tithe, and I'm like, what is that, tithe? And they said, give 10%. I said, that sounds like a good deal. And that's how I got started, from that seed planted in Vietnam. But when I went in, we were drafted. And you served your 2 years and got out. But nowadays, everybody is, you join. You got to have an education. You got to join. And but they still have to go through training, hard training. Some people can handle it, some people can't. But you're basically alone, even though you're with a bunch of guys, either from a squad to a mess hall or whatever. You're still basically, you have your own private thoughts, and a lot of times you're thinking about how are people back home, how's things going, and the way you're treated by the places. I mean, in San Francisco, you're not allowed to wear your uniform, in the public. And it's kind of like, well, here I am protecting the country, doing the best that I can. And you're at times treated kind of like a wet dog. But when I see people nowadays, they've kind of woken up a little bit, and I hear them, and I see sometimes when I'm honored when I see young people say, "Thank you for your service," and it's not much to say, but the fact is, it means a lot. It means a lot. Even when I see young man like yourself, I thank you for what you did. Your war was different than mine. Mine was different than my dad's, and my dad's was different than the other guys. And so, war's hell, and you gotta just make up your mind you're going to get through it, get home, and do your best job that you can to protect your country.
I would like to say that I have the utmost respect for all veterans, whether they serve peacetime, but especially if they serve during wartime. I've had relatives that served in probably just about every war that we've had. World War II, I've had some in World War I, but I never met them. Vietnam War, Korean War, Gulf War, and I've been blessed with the fact that they've all came home. But this last couple of years, the traveling memorial wall for Vietnam was visiting in Corona, and I had the privilege to go and see it. And it was overwhelming, all the names on that wall. And if you see a veteran, thank them for their service. And because there's no greater thing that someone can do but to serve their country. And to all my fellow veterans, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, we're all brothers in the military, brothers and sisters in the military. So I'd just like to wish you a happy Veterans Day.
So if you've never served, the mindset that I would ask you to have for veterans, active duty, but especially for veterans, is that there is a lot of stuff that person has done in sacrifice and in service to the country, right? The nation asked for that person to go and to do something. And some of those things that person had to do will stay with them for the rest of their lives. That deserves a certain amount of respect, right? There are things that person never thought that they were ever going to have to get into, they never thought that they were going to do and all that stuff, and they did. And they live with it every single day. And that deserves our respect. That deserves our respect, especially when you talk about like Alan that you've seen before, but Alan, who for a little while did tunnel rat stuff in Vietnam. In the Marine Corps, that is we have a certain culture. Some say it's a cult, but it's a certain culture. We know of what the tunnel rats did in Vietnam, and we hold them to such a high regard. Alan didn't even know for a long time about how big of a deal that was. So to me and to people that I served with, he was like the guy to look up to. He had, he had some cojones, right? He had intestinal fortitude, right? He was, so he did that, and then you look at, you look at my mom, Lori, for signing up, granted during that time it was peacetime, but right before Desert Storm and Desert Shield and doing everything that they did. And then you look at Ron and all the stuff that he got into, and he really signed up during the thick of it, you know what I mean? And there are things that Ron has to battle and that my mom have to battle, and things that Alan has to battle. And then there's the things I have to battle. I would say as a civilian, I would keep that in mind, that, You know, these guys, they and these girls, they gave up so much to have a better way of life and to preserve that better way of life. So during this Veterans Day, say thank you. It's the least that we can do. Especially someone like Alan who didn't get it when he came home. I did. He didn't. A simple thank you goes a long way.